Why was the equipment bay so quiet? Even the hum of the ventilation system seemed to hesitate, as if the air itself knew something wrong was about to happen. Lieutenant Mason Thornton held Staff Sergeant Jenna Sullivan's precision rifle scope in both hands, the way a man might handle something fragile, if he cared not to break it. The fluorescent lights above Fort Bridger's maintenance bay reflected in the curved glass of the optic, throwing small halos of light across the metal tables. A dozen soldiers watched from their workstations, the clatter of tools dying one by one as curiosity grew into silence. Thornton turned the scope slowly, admiring it, pretending at professionalism. He was the kind of officer who had learned that confidence could substitute for competence when no one looked too closely. His uniform was sharp, his boots mirror bright, his posture textbook perfect. To a casual observer, he embodied discipline. To anyone who'd served with him, he embodied something else, ambition without depth. "Quality control inspection," he said, loud enough for everyone to hear. "Division championship equipment must meet standards." Jenna stood across the table, her hands resting on the stock of her rifle. Her face betrayed nothing, but her jaw was set, tight, deliberate. She knew this wasn't protocol. Thornton wasn't part of the inspection staff. He wasn't even assigned to competition oversight. But you didn't question a lieutenant in front of a crowd, not when you were enlisted. Not when you were a woman in a room where respect was too often rationed. Her scope, was a Night Force ATACR. Custom mount, hand-tuned, zeroed for her rifle after hundreds of hours and thousands of dollars she could barely afford. She had trusted that glass the way some people trusted prayer. It wasn't just equipment, it was proof of her precision, her craft. Thornton ran a thumb along the mounting system, a gesture that looked like inspection but felt like possession. "You've torqued this mount yourself." "Yes, sir." He nodded absently, turning the optic again. "Looks solid, though I've seen mounts fail under stress. Polymer fatigue, improper Loctite application, things you can't always see until it's too late." Across the room, Specialist Boyd stopped mid-motion, a cleaning rod frozen in his hand. He knew the tone, mock concern wrapped around condescension, and so did everyone else. "Regulations say we verify," Thornton added, "especially when you'll be representing the division." He applied a little pressure, barely perceptible at first. A flex of wrist against mount, a small creak that echoed like a threat. Jenna's voice stayed calm. "That's unnecessary, sir. The mount been tested beyond spec." But Thornton wasn't listening. His thumb tightened. His other hand twisted opposite, torquing against the grain of the rail. The sound came like a crack of dry bone, sharp, unnatural. The bay went dead silent. Pieces of the mount hung limp at odd angles, sheared where force met design. A $4,000 optic ruined in 2 seconds. Thornton feigned a wince. "Defective," he said softly, almost kindly. "Unfortunate, but it happens. You'll need to withdraw, Staff Sergeant. Can't compete with damaged gear." He offered the ruined scope back to her like a condolence. Jenna didn't move. For a long moment she simply stared at what was left of her mount. Her pulse slowed. The noise in the room disappeared until there was only her breathing, steady, deliberate, quiet as a countdown. She looked up, meeting his eyes. "Mind if I borrow yours, Lieutenant?" The words dropped into the silence like shrapnel. Thornton blinked. Around them, a dozen soldiers froze between disbelief and suppressed laughter. "My scope?" he asked, as if he hadn't heard right. "Yours," she repeated. "You've got a backup optic. I'll use one of them." The lieutenant's smile twitched, then returned, brittle. "You want to shoot with my equipment?" "Yes, sir." It was the tone that unnerved him, not defiant, not sarcastic, just calm. He hesitated, realizing he'd lost control of the performance. He could humiliate someone who begged or argued, but not someone who refused to play along. Finally, he unhooked the M110 from his shoulder, the same rifle he carried for show during inspections. He held it halfway toward her but didn't release it immediately. "When you fail with my equipment," he murmured, "everyone will know it wasn't the gear. It was you." Their hands met briefly on the rifle, his polished and sure, hers calloused from years of recoil and field grit. For a moment they stood locked in tableau, an unspoken war of grip strength and composure. Then he let go. The rifle felt wrong the second it entered her hands. Heavier, longer, the balance forward weighted for someone taller. The cheek rest too high, the trigger far too heavy. A weapon built for his body, not hers. But a rifle was a rifle. And if there was one thing Staff Sergeant Jenna Sullivan had learned from 3 combat tour, it was that you adapt, or you fail. Colonel Bishop entered the bay then, his boots sharp against the concrete. 30 years of command had carved authority into the lines of his voice. "What's going on here?" Thornton snapped to attention. "Equipment failure, sir. Staff Sergeant Sullivan's optic mount broke during inspection. She's requested to use my backup rifle for the championship qualification." Bishop's eyes shifted between them, landing on the broken mount. He didn't need to touch it to know what had happened. Some truths didn't need investigation. They just needed eyes old enough to recognize intent. "That's highly irregular," Bishop said. "You understand the risk, Staff Sergeant?" "Yes, sir." The colonel's gaze lingered on her face, steady, unreadable. Then he nodded once. "Range time opens at 1300. You'll have 1 hour for familiarization. Don't be late." And just like that, the decision became official. When Bishop left, the room exhaled. Soldiers returned to their routines, pretending not to glance her way, but they did, every few seconds, sneaking looks of curiosity, sympathy, maybe admiration. Thornton smirked. 4 hours until range time. Might want to study the ballistics, not that it'll help. Jenna didn't answer. She simply lifted the rifle, checked the chamber, and began to work the bolt, slow, methodical, learning the feel. The scope's reticle was wrong for her, Mildot instead of Horace. The trigger pull felt like dragging a stone through mud. The cheek weld forced her into an awkward angle, but each flaw was just data, and data could be mastered. Through the bay's high windows, sunlight poured across the range fields beyond. The flags were already stirring in a crosswind that would test every competitor tomorrow. She set the rifle down gently and looked at him one last time. "I'll see you at qualification, Lieutenant." He smiled like a man certain of victory. "Yes, Staff Sergeant, you will." By the time she returned to her quarters, the adrenaline had burned into focus. The barracks room was small, standard visiting NCO accommodations, but every inch of it was orderly. Her locker gleamed with polish, her boots lined perfectly under the bunk. On the desk sat a folded photograph of her old unit, taken after Helmand Province. 6 of the faces in that picture were gone now. She sat on the bunk and began disassembling Thornton's rifle piece by piece. Carbon coated the bolt carrier. Copper fouling streaked the bore. The trigger assembly was caked with old lubricant turned to grit. Maintenance had been an afterthought, which told her everything about his approach to marksmanship. She cleaned each part in silence. The rhythmic scrape of a brush through the chamber was the sound of control returning. It wasn't anger that fueled her, it was precision. Every motion deliberate, every bolt turned to spec. When the rifle was reassembled, it felt different, cleaner, balanced, still not hers but no longer foreign. She ran calculations on paper, jotting down ballistic data for the 7.62 NATO rounds, adjusting for barrel length, twist rate, and expected wind drift. Thornton's 0, she estimated, was set for 100 meters, lazy but common. She preferred 200 for mid-range compensation, but she could adapt. The knock on her door came just before noon. "Come in." Master Sergeant Bert Whitman stepped through, filling the doorway like an avalanche in slow motion. They called him Rock for a reason. 52 years old, scar down one cheek, eyes that had seen every kind of battlefield chaos. "Thornton's an idiot," he said by way of greeting. "Most are," Jenna replied softly, still writing data. Rock chuckled, setting a coffee cup on her desk. Heard what happened. You could have filed a report. Wouldn't change anything before qualification. He nodded, watching her work. You remind me of Helmand. That Valley op, your rifle took shrapnel, you grabbed Peterson and kept shooting for 3 days. Different weapon, different zero, didn't matter. That was combat, she said. He leaned against the wall. And this is just a different battlefield, politics instead of bullets. Same principle, don't let them take your shot. He reached into his pocket and handed her a folded piece of paper. From Moore, Thornton's qualification data last month. Zero confirmed at 3 and 600. Basic numbers, nothing fancy. She studied the sheet, memorizing drop tables and elevation holds. Appreciate it. Don't appreciate it, he said, moving toward the door. Just win with it. When he left, she glanced once more at the photograph on her desk. The men in it had trusted her aim with their lives. Tomorrow's targets weren't enemies, but the stakes were no smaller. At 12:45, she grabbed her gear and stepped into the corridor. The air outside carried the smell of sun-baked concrete and distant gun oil. As she walked toward the range, soldiers paused mid-conversation. Some nodded, some smirked. Word had spread fast. By the time she reached the firing line, Gunnery Sergeant Dale Richter was waiting, clipboard in hand, binoculars around his neck. 20 years running ranges had made him a man allergic to nonsense. You're cleared for 20 rounds of familiarization, he said. Targets at 1, 3, and 600. Winds light, maybe 3 knots from the left. Let's see what you've got. Jenna nodded, laid out her mat and settled prone. She loaded the first magazine, 5 rounds, and exhaled. The scope glass was slightly cloudy, the trigger heavy, but the fundamentals were the same as always. Bone support, muscle relaxation, natural point of aim. Her finger pressed. The rifle kicked. The steel plate at 100 meters swung with a satisfying clang. Through the next 4 rounds, the impacts grouped tight, just left of center. 300 meters, 5 more shots, all center mass. 600, 10 rounds left. Wind shifting now 8 knots. She adjusted hold and fired 1 deliberate shot at a time, listening for the delayed ring of steel. 17 hits, 3 low, predictable misses. Richter climbed down from the tower, dust kicking under his boots. Not bad, he said, checking his clipboard. 17 of 20 borrowed rifle. You've got your data, make it count tomorrow. She stood, stretching her shoulders. Yes, Gunnery Sergeant. As she walked back toward the barracks, the sun dropped behind the horizon, staining the sky orange. Somewhere across base, she could hear cadence calls from evening PT. The ordinary rhythm of the army continued, indifferent to her private war. She thought of Thornton, probably drinking, probably bragging. She thought of her scope, broken because someone feared what she could prove. And when she finally lay in her bunk that night, sleep came slowly. Her last thought before darkness was simple, clean, unshaken. Tomorrow the targets would not care who she was. They would only measure truth. Why did the morning feel so still, like the air was holding its breath for her? The alarm struck 4:30 exactly, sharp and merciless, and Jenna was already awake before it sounded. Muscle memory did that. Years of early patrols, of rising before dawn to move unseen, had trained her body to greet darkness without complaint. She swung her legs off the bunk, boots meeting floor, steady, deliberate. The barracks around her were silent. She moved through routine with practiced efficiency, uniform, hair, coffee, gear check. The motions weren't about habit, they were about control. Everything she could control before the range began. Outside, Fort Bridger's eastern horizon bled from black to gray, the first hint of sunrise turning the low clouds copper. The air smelled like dust and rifle oil. In the distance, she could already hear range crews setting up, steel plates clanging, trucks backing into position, voices echoing against the concrete walls of the qualification complex. By 5:45 she was there. The competition field spread wide before her, 10 firing lanes stretching out to 800 meters, targets glinting faintly in the half-light. The wind moved gentle ribbons through the range flags, 6 knots steady, left to right. Other competitors arrived in groups. Staff Sergeant Edward Collins, 3-time champion. Sergeant Paul Hendris, whose name carried whispered respect among long-range shooters. And near the far end of the line, Lieutenant Mason Thornton himself, the man whose rifle she now carried like borrowed defiance. He looked well-rested, or pretended to. His smile came the moment he saw her. "Morning, Staff Sergeant. Sleep well. Big day ahead." Jenna kept walking, her rifle cradled easily in her hands. "Morning, Lieutenant." His smirk sharpened. "Remember, my zero's set for me, not you. Try not to damage it when you miss." "Wouldn't dream of it." He turned toward the gathering crowd, raising his voice just enough. "Make sure everyone watches this, huh? First female competitor in division history. Going to be educational." He didn't need to say what kind of education he meant. At exactly 600, Colonel Bishop stepped from the observation tower, clipboard under one arm, range glasses perched on his cap. The murmurs faded instantly. "All competitors to your assigned firing points." His voice rolled like gravel, steady, authoritative. 40 rounds, 5 positions, targets from 100 to 800 meters. Minimum score of 32 hits for qualification. You will have 5 minutes per stage. Any questions? Silence answered. "Then take your positions." Jenna walked to lane 7, the center of the field. She knelt, laid out her mat, and began setting up. Every movement deliberate, bag aligned, bipod extended, optic caps off. The rifle felt heavier today, not from weight but from expectation. Behind the safety barrier, soldiers gathered, far more than normal for qualification. Maybe 60, maybe more. Word had spread overnight. They wanted to see if she'd fail or make history. Private Spencer Hill stood near the front, young, anxious. Corporal Allison Kent leaned against the fence, arms crossed, eyes unreadable. And at the far end, Master Sergeant Whitman watched in silence, expression carved from stone. "Shooters, load and make ready." Jenna slid 8 rounds into the magazine, closed the bolt, and settled into prone. The concrete beneath her chest radiated cold through her uniform. Her heartbeat slowed. The world narrowed to the circle of glass before her eye. "You may commence firing." The range erupted, 40 rifles barking at once, echoing off the concrete backstops. She heard none of it. Only the thump of recoil, the steady rhythm of her breathing, the mechanical cycle of bolt and brass. First shot impact, center mass 100 meters. The steel plate swung, sunlight catching its edge. Second, third, fourth, all hits. By the 8th shot, her shoulder ached from Thornton's heavy buffer spring, but the rhythm felt right. She exhaled, safe-checked the rifle, and waited. "Cease fire." 8 for 8, perfect start. A ripple of conversation moved through the spectators. She caught fragments, she hit them all. No misses. She stood, adjusted her sling, moved to the 200-meter position. Kneeling now, less stable, harder to control breathing. She loaded 8 more rounds. "Commence firing." The targets danced smaller through the scope. The wrong stock length made her posture awkward, muscle tremors threatening precision, but she adapted. Breath in, half exhale, hold, press. Hits came like clockwork. 1 miss on the 6th, trigger jerk, rushed. She felt it before the round even landed. 7 out of 8, acceptable. At 300 meters, she sat cross-legged, elbows braced against knees. The sitting position gave back stability. Her shots cut clean through center targets, the rhythm natural again. 10-round magazine, 8-round course, she fired, cycled, fired again. 8 more hits. 23 of 24. Behind her, the crowd was no longer whispering. They were talking openly now. "She's running perfect pace. Thornton looks nervous." He did, his jaw tightened each time her plate swung. Shooters, moved to 600-meter position. This was the test. Wind mattered now. Flags flared rightward at 8 knots, variable gusts. She dialed her turret, adjusted holdover, exhaled. The targets at 600 were 6-inch steel plates, half the width of a man's chest. First shot hit. Second hit. Third low gust, she corrected. Fourth through seventh, all center. Seventh shot cracked left as the wind shifted mid-trigger pull. Miss she couldn't recover. 7 hits. 30 of 32. Already qualified, if the last stage didn't unravel. The murmur behind her grew into applause that someone quickly shushed. Then came the final distance, 800 meters. The air shimmered with mirage heat waves twisting light. The targets were paper silhouettes, no clang of confirmation, just spotters with flags. She loaded her final 8 rounds. Commence firing. The world slowed. First shot high, adjusted half-mil down. Second perfect, flag raised. Third wind shift, miscorrect. Fourth hit, fifth hit. She moved like a metronome, breath, press, bolt, reacquire. The rifle's heavy recoil no longer foreign, it had become an extension of her will. By the final shot, she knew before the spotter lifted his flag. Dead center. Cease fire. The line went quiet. Soldiers stood, some shaded eyes to see the far targets. Then Private Hill started clapping, hesitant at first, then louder. Within seconds, half the observation area joined. She'd shot 37 hits out of 40 rounds, with someone else's weapon. Colonel Bishop descended the tower, clipboard tucked against his chest. His expression gave away nothing as he stopped in front of her lane. 37 hits, he said flatly. Third highest qualification score this year. Yes, sir. You're qualified for championship entry. Registration closes at 1700. I'll be there. Bishop's eyes softened for a fraction of a second. I suspect you will. He moved on. Thornton remained frozen at his lane, staring at her targets through his spotting scope, as if disbelief could change physics. Sergeant Atrix, 2 lanes down, approached her. Solid shooting, he said simply, especially with someone else's 0. Appreciate that, Sergeant. He nodded toward the weapon. You keeping that thing? Until further notice. He hesitated, then said quietly, Equipment bay opens at 1400 for gear prep. Sometimes spare gear shows up. Might want to stop by. She studied his face. He was offering something without saying it. A chance, a choice. Maybe, she said. The range emptied slowly, conversations buzzing in her wake. When she slung the borrowed rifle over her shoulder and started toward the motor pool, Thornton caught up, stride sharp, voice low. Lucky shooting, Staff Sergeant. Championship's different, sustained performance. You won't keep it up. Jenna turned, eyes level. We'll find out in 7 days, won't we? His jaw flexed. We will. She left him standing in the heat. By the time she reached her quarters, the adrenaline had drained, leaving only exhaustion, and the deep ache of muscles worked past comfort. She locked the rifle in its case, sat on the edge of her bunk and stared at her hands. They trembled slightly, not from fear but release. On the desk lay her phone, 2 missed calls from her father, retired General Frank Sullivan, a man whose legend in marksmanship had shadowed her entire career. She ignored it. Not yet. Instead, she pulled out her cleaning kit and began stripping the rifle again. Routine restored calm. By the time the weapon gleamed under lamplight, her mind had already moved ahead to the championship, to the days of endurance shooting ahead, to what came after. At 1400, she went to the equipment bay. Chief Warrant Officer Walsh stood behind the counter, his expression measured. He looked at her, then down at a form in his hands. Staff Sergeant Sullivan, qualified this morning, correct? Yes, Chief. He nodded once, then reached under the counter, producing a familiar box. During inventory, we found this. Misfiled under lost and found. Serial matches your damaged scope. Intact. Must have been a paperwork error. Inside, her Nightforce ATACR lay pristine. Perfect. Her heartbeat thudded once heavy. This wasn't coincidence. Somewhere up the chain, someone wanted to make things right quietly. "Sign for it?" Walsh asked. She looked at the box, then at him. "No, Chief." His brows lifted. "I'll shoot with what I qualified on. Regulations would require re-zero and requalification. Not enough time." Walsh studied her a long moment, then nodded slowly. "Understood." He returned the box to storage, his voice lower now. "Good luck, Staff Sergeant." She walked out, the air outside bright enough to sting her eyes. Some part of her wanted that scope back desperately, her own weapon, her own balance. But taking it would give Thornton a story to tell. She only made it because they helped her. This way there be no questions. At 1500, she met Rock Whitman at the base coffee shop. The place smelled of espresso and floor polish, sunlight slanting through dusty blinds. 37 hits, he said, sliding a cup across the table. Not bad for borrowed iron. She smiled faintly. "Qual done. Championship starts Monday." "Heard you turned down the new scope." "I didn't want the excuse it would give him." Rock leaned back, the chair creaking. "So you'll compete a week with gear built for someone else." "I've shot worse." "Helman Valley," he said, eyes narrowing. "IED hit your rifle. You borrowed Peterson and kept shooting for 3 days. Different caliber, different everything. You adapted." "Different war," she said quietly. He nodded. "Same battlefield, different uniform. Thornton's not your only enemy. He's just the one wearing a name tag." The coffee went cold between them, unspoken truth settling like dust. "You realize," he said finally, "everyone will be watching Monday, not because they want you to win." "I know. They want a story. Either way, you'll give them one." Outside the window, soldiers crossed the parade ground, laughter echoing off barracks walls. The army continued, oblivious to the small revolutions it created inside its own ranks. Jenna finished her coffee, stood, and adjusted her cover. "Then I'd better make it worth watching." That night back in her quarters, she texted her father a brief line. "Championship starts Monday. We'll call after." No explanations, no debate, just space. Saturday she trained alone, 50 rounds at the familiarization range, learning every creak and quirk of Thornton's rifle. By evening, the trigger felt almost natural under her finger. Sunday she forced herself to rest, checked gear, cleaned, recleaned, laid out ammunition in perfect rows, tried to sleep. But sleep came late, and when it did, it was shallow dreams of distant ranges, the sound of breaking polymer echoing through concrete walls. She woke at 4:30 again, heartbeat steady, mind clear. It was Monday, and the war she hadn't asked for was just beginning. Why did the air at dawn always feel heavier before competition, like the range itself was waiting to judge her? The championship morning began with a silence too clean, too deliberate. No wind yet, no sound except the rhythmic crunch of boots on gravel as the top shooters of Fort Bridger filed toward the range complex. The spectators were already gathering. Officers, instructors, visiting units, even a few retired veterans leaning against the observation rails. It wasn't just another qualification. It was the Division Marksman's Championship, where records were written in bullet scars and reputations measured in breath control. And this year, for the first time, a woman stood on that line. Jenna Sullivan moved with calm precision, her rifle case in one hand, gear bag in the other. The weapon inside wasn't hers. It would never feel like hers, but she'd spent the last week making it obey her instead of resist. The sky was still half dark when she arrived. A low mist hugged the valley, drifting across the field like smoke from a battlefield not yet fought. "Competitors, stand by for equipment inspection," came the call over the loudspeaker. She opened her case and presented the weapon. The inspecting officer, a stern captain with a clipboard, glanced up briefly. "Lieutenant Thornton Serial," he said. "You're still running that?" "Yes, sir." He made a note, expression unreadable. "Risky move." "Calculated one." He studied her for a second longer, then signed her clearance tag. "Good luck, Staff Sergeant." The words carried no irony, just quiet curiosity. She wasn't the underdog anymore. She was the story everyone had come to witness. As the range filled with competitors, Jenna scanned the lanes. Collins, Hendress, and Maurer were already setting up, joking softly between them. Thornton stood at the far end again, perfectly pressed uniform, reflective sunglasses hiding his eyes. When their gazes met, he raised one hand in a mock salute, the kind that wasn't about respect. "Shooters to your positions." Colonel Bishop's voice rolled across the range, amplified by the PA. "Today's course of fire will test precision, adaptability, and composure. 8 stages, total score cumulative. Targets from 100 to 900 meters. Wind corrections and time management at your discretion. Each stage, you will have 5 minutes. Remember, composure is accuracy." The crowd hushed. Jenna knelt on her mat, feeling the familiar grit of dust under her elbows. The rifle lay steady against her shoulder, barrel gleaming faintly in the rising sun. She whispered to herself, not prayer, not mantra, just breath control. Bone, breath, break. Stage 1, 100 meters, fire when ready. She squeezed, the rifle cracked, metal rang. 8 targets, 8 hits. Applause rippled through the fence line, quiet but growing. She ignored it. This was only the start. Stage meters. Windless still, mirage steady. Her finger moved like thought, 8 more hits. Stage 3, 300 meters. Now the rhythm settled into her bones. She shifted positions, kneeling. Slight tremor in the right forearm, corrected by grip adjustment. She fired. The shots landed like punctuation marks to sentences she'd already written in her head. When she finished, her score was perfect, 24 out of 24. Thornton, 2 lanes away, was struggling. 2 misses already, then 3. His jaw worked visibly with each reload. Every clang of Jenna's target made his movements sharper, tenser. By the 4th stage, the wind began to move. 3 to 4 knots at first, then gusts that rolled across the valley, tugging flags toward the right. It was the kind of invisible chaos that separated marksmen from shooters. Jenna dialed 1/2 mil, then paused, watching the grass beyond the berm instead of the flags. The wind up high moved opposite, a countercurrent. She corrected left instead. First shot broke the silence, center mass hit. Then another. And another. Around her, other shooters began missing, chasing shifting wind that changed faster than they could compensate. She didn't chase, she predicted. 32 hits, then 33. When the ceasefire call came, the scoreboard flashed. Sullivan 32-32, first place standing. Even Bishop looked impressed, though his expression stayed professional. The spectators whispered her name now, some in admiration, others in disbelief. Thornton removed his ear protection slowly, expression dark. He walked past her lane, voice low enough that only she heard. "Enjoy it while it lasts." She didn't look up. "I plan to." He moved on. By midday, heat shimmered across the range. The next stages were endurance, rapid target transition drills under time pressure, multiple distances. The kind of stress designed to strip away polish and reveal instinct. Between rounds, Jenna sat under the shade canopy, sipping water, eyes closed. The murmurs around her faded into background noise. Boots scuffing gravel, radio chatter, the faint metallic clink of rifles being adjusted. She thought of her father then, the phone call she hadn't made, The last words between them months ago. You're trying to prove something that doesn't need proving. Maybe he was right. Maybe she didn't need to prove it, but she needed to know it. That her worth wasn't inherited, wasn't dependent on someone's name or someone's permission. Her radio crackled. Competitors next stage in 5 minutes. Report to lanes. She stood, slung the rifle, and walked to position. Her breathing slowed again. Stage 5, rapid fire, multiple distances. 8 targets, random order. The whistle blew. She moved like a metronome. Shot, transition, bolt, adjust, fire again. 100 to 500 meters in under 2 minutes. The rifle's heavy trigger slowed her rhythm slightly, but her mind adapted. Each shot became muscle memory. Each recoil a pulse. When the timer ended, she had 7 of 8 hits. Spectators clapped. Officers took notes. Thornton stared daggers from his lane, his performance slipping further behind. And for the first time, Jenna let herself feel it, just a flicker of pride. The quiet kind that didn't show on the face but hummed in the chest like steady thunder. At the far edge of the observation stand, Captain Evelyn Pierce leaned against the railing, watching through binoculars. She wasn't part of competition staff. Her assignment was with internal operations. But Bishop had asked her to keep an eye on some things. She watched Thornton's earlier qualification footage again on her tablet, comparing timestamps, looking at the damaged scope photos logged by maintenance the week before. The incident report didn't match the witness statements. The timestamps were off by hours. Something was wrong. She looked up from the screen to where Thornton now stood, jaw tight, frustration leaking through posture. And a thought formed, cold and certain. He did it. But she said nothing, yet. Stage 6, moving target 600 meters, Bishop announced. Wind had picked up again, cross gusts now unpredictable. The moving silhouette track rolled side to side, slow but erratic. Jenna adjusted her scope tracking, her focus tunneled. Her mind quieted. At that distance, bullets took nearly a full second to reach target. You didn't shoot where it was, you shot where it would be. She fired, the target jerked, hit. Another. Third. Fourth miss barely. She corrected immediately, changing lead by half a meter. Fifth hit. Sixth hit. 7 of 8 again. Her total score, 46 of 48. A soundless disbelief rolled through the spectators. Even Collins, 3-time champion, had missed 5 more than her. When the ceasefire call came, Thornton's lane was silent. His last shot had gone wild, well off target. He slammed his magazine out harder than necessary, muttering under his breath. Pierce noticed. Her pen stopped moving. She caught Bishop's eye and gave a subtle nod. "We need to talk." He returned it, barely perceptible. By late afternoon, the final stage loomed, the 900-meter mark, the farthest, the hardest, the one few ever cleared clean. The air shimmered under heat. The mirage danced like ghosts above the targets. "Final stage," Bishop called out. "Shooters, you've come this far, end with composure." Jenna lay prone again, body aligning perfectly. Her breathing slowed. She adjusted elevation, added 2 full mils for drop, another half for crosswind. She inhaled. Somewhere in the distance, a bird lifted off the range berm, startled by the tension in the air. Commence firing. Her world became the crosshair. First shot hit. Second hit. Third miss low. Fourth hit. She corrected hold, compensating for mirage distortion. Fifth hit. Sixth hit. Seventh hit. Final shot. She paused, let silence stretch, then exhale. Trigger press. Impact center. Ceasefire. The scoreboard flickered. Sullivan 53-56, new division record. The crowd erupted. Even Bishop smiled openly this time. He stepped forward, voice carrying over the cheers. "New record confirmed. Congratulations, Staff Sergeant Sullivan. You've just made history." The words landed heavy real. She stood, dust coating her sleeves, hair damp from sweat. Applause thundered, not polite this time, genuine. Thornton didn't clap. He simply gathered his rifle, expression dark, and walked off the range without a word. Pierce watched him go, jaw tightening. She closed her tablet, turned, and followed Bishop toward the command trailer. Something in her gut said this wasn't over. That evening, the barracks were alive with noise. Someone played music from a Bluetooth speaker. Laughter spilled down the hallways. Even those who hadn't liked her were celebrating. But Jenna stayed in her room, gear still scattered across her desk. The weapon, Thornton's weapon, lay open, bolt removed as if waiting for release. Her phone buzzed, unknown number. She answered. "Staff Sergeant Sullivan." "Yes." "This is Captain Pierce, Division Operations. Congratulations on your win." "Thank you, ma'am." Pause, then, "I'd like to speak with you tomorrow morning, concerning the incident last week with your equipment." Jenna's heartbeat slowed. Understood. 0800, command trailer. Click. The line went dead. She sat there a long moment, phone still in hand, staring at the rifle. Something she hadn't told anyone stirred beneath the calm, the truth about what really happened that morning in the maintenance bay. There was more to it than anyone knew. She kept it quiet because she wanted to win without pity, without interference. But maybe silence had its price. She looked at her reflection in the dark glass of the window, her own eyes staring back steady, exhausted, proud, and uncertain. Outside, laughter still echoed through the corridor. She whispered softly to no one. "Sometimes you win the war, but the peace, that's another story." And somewhere beyond that silence, she knew. The story wasn't finished. Not yet. Why did silence always sound louder after victory? Morning came pale and brittle, the kind of dawn that carried no warmth. Jenna Sullivan sat at her desk, the remains of a sleepless night scattered around her, an empty mug, her disassembled rifle, a folded note she'd never sent. The barracks hallway outside was still quiet, footsteps distant, the world just beginning to stir. She'd been awake since 400. She tried to sleep, but the noise in her head wouldn't stop, echoes of the crowd, of the rifle's report, of Bishop's voice declaring a record that still didn't feel real. At 7:45, she buttoned her uniform jacket, tied her hair with practiced precision, and stepped into the corridor. The air smelled faintly of coffee and disinfectant. As she walked toward the command complex, soldiers she passed gave subtle nods, some congratulatory, others merely curious. Respect was a strange currency here. You earned it, then paid for it in rumors. By 7:59, she was standing outside the trailer labeled Division Ops Restricted. The door opened exactly on time. Captain Evelyn Pierce stood framed in the doorway, tall, dark hair pulled tight, eyes that missed nothing. She gestured Jenna inside with a brief motion. "At ease, Staff Sergeant. Take a seat." The office was small, efficient, maps on the wall, a laptop open on the table, coffee steaming in a paper cup beside it. The hum of the air conditioner filled the space between them. Pierce didn't speak for the first few seconds. She just studied Jenna, as if measuring what kind of person she was about to talk to. "First off," she said finally, "congratulations. That score was remarkable." "Thank you, ma'am. You've made more than a record. You've made a statement." Jenna stayed silent. Compliments from officers usually came with direction, not sincerity. Pierce opened a folder on the table and slid a printed image across. It showed a close-up photo of the broken scope mount from that first morning, fractured, splintered at the joint. "You recognize this?" Jenna's eyes flicked down. "Yes, ma'am, that's mine." Pierce nodded. According to maintenance logs, this was marked damaged during inspection. but the torque readings on the fracture pattern don't match normal stress failure. Jenna met her eyes, meaning someone applied deliberate rotational force, manually. There it was, said out loud. Pierce leaned back slightly. I've compared timestamps from that morning's equipment log, witness reports, and security footage from the maintenance bay. Some of it doesn't line up. She tapped the folder again. Lieutenant Thornton's ID badge shows entry at 7:31. Maintenance inspection wasn't scheduled until 900. That's before you arrived. But the footage from the hallway camera is missing 32 minutes of data. Corrupted file, apparently. Jenna exhaled slowly. That sounds about right. So you knew. I suspected, Jenna said softly. But I couldn't prove it. And if I said something before qualification, it would have looked like I was making excuses. Pierce studied her a long time. You realize what you did was risky. You could have been disqualified, or worse. I know. You still shot with his rifle. Yes, ma'am. Pierce's gaze softened slightly. Why? Jenna looked at the photo again, the shattered mount, the careless cruelty behind it. Then she looked up. Because if I'd filed a complaint, they'd say I couldn't win without help. I didn't want pity. I wanted proof. For a long moment, neither spoke. The hum of the AC filled the silence. Then Pierce said, Bishop requested a formal review of the incident. We'll need your statement, officially. Jenna nodded once, understood. Pierce closed the folder. This doesn't leave this room for now. Do you understand? Yes, ma'am. And Sullivan. Ma'am. Pierce's tone shifted, quieter. You did good out there. Don't let anyone convince you otherwise. For a brief second, Jenna saw something human beneath the officer's restraint. Maybe admiration, maybe warning. Yes, ma'am, she said again, standing. Pierce offered a small nod. You're dismissed. Outside, the sunlight hit her face like a slap. The day had brightened while she'd been inside, and now the range beyond the motor pool shimmered under a white sky. She started walking without direction, past the barracks, past the mess hall, until she found herself near the observation bleachers, the same ones from yesterday's final round. They were empty now, except for one figure sitting near the edge. Master Sergeant Whitman. He was half out of uniform, cap off, elbows resting on his knees. When he saw her, he motioned her over with a nod. Word travels fast, he said. Heard Pierce pulled you in. She's investigating. About time. He took a sip from a battered thermos, then passed it toward her. Coffee, black. She shook her head. I'm fine. Suit yourself. He took another swallow. You did something yesterday most people won't forget, but people like Thornton don't forget either. He'll come back swinging. I know, she said quietly. Rock looked at her for a moment, studying her expression. You don't seem scared. I'm not, she said, then after a pause, just tired. He smiled faintly. Tired's better than broken. They sat in silence for a while, watching the empty field. Flags shifted gently in the morning wind. You know, he said after a while, back in '09, I had a captain do the same thing to one of my shooters. Sabotaged her trigger group before competition. We found out a week later, but by then she'd already shipped out. What happened? Captain got promoted, he shrugged. That's how the system works sometimes. Quiet revenge, quiet consequences. Jenna didn't reply. Rock's voice softened. Pierce isn't one of them, though. If she's digging, she means it. Maybe, Jenna said, but it won't matter if command decides it's easier to forget. He looked at her, something like pride hidden in his tired eyes. You think you're the only one who's tired of forgetting. The words hung there. Then he stood, brushed dust off his knees, and said simply, keep your head down and keep your shot steady. She watched him walk away, sunlight glinting off the silver in his hair. By afternoon, rumors had already spread. Thornton had been called in to Bishop's office. Some said it was about equipment. Some said Pierce had found proof of tampering. Others whispered that command wanted the whole thing buried. The air on base changed, thicker, quieter, like everyone was waiting for someone to make the first mistake. Jenna stayed in the shooting bay that evening, alone, methodically cleaning Thornton's rifle. Each patch of solvent-soaked cloth came out less black than the last, until the metal gleamed under the fluorescent light. She wasn't angry anymore, just focused. Every click of the bolt was like exhaling control. She thought of that first day again, the sound of plastic cracking, the look on his face, the smug certainty. He hadn't broken her scope because he could. He'd done it because he needed to believe he still mattered more. Now that belief was crumbling. At 1900, she received a message through official channels, report to operations, immediate. When she arrived, Pierce and Bishop were both present. Thornton sat across the table from them, uniform crisp, expression carved from stone. Bishop gestured for her to sit. "Staff Sergeant Sullivan," he began, tone controlled. "We've reviewed the evidence regarding the incident preceding qualification. There are discrepancies." Thornton's eyes flicked toward her briefly, then back to the wall. Pierce spoke next. "The maintenance logs and badge data show Lieutenant Thornton entered the bay early that morning. His report claims he was verifying gear readiness. However, footage from a secondary camera, unofficial, mounted near supply lockers, shows direct manipulation of your equipment." Bishop's voice hardened. Manipulation that resulted in damage to a government-issued optic. Silence filled the room like pressure. Thornton finally spoke. "Sir, that footage could be misleading. I was inspecting." "Save it," Bishop said, sharp enough to cut the air. "You were off the authorized inspection list. You had no clearance to handle that weapon or any associated gear." Thornton's jaw clenched. "With respect, sir, I was ensuring fair competition. Staff Sergeant Sullivan had made modifications to her weapon outside standard parameters." Pierce's tone turned cold. "No such modifications were found. You broke her mount, Lieutenant, intentionally." He didn't answer. Bishop leaned forward. "You're being relieved of all competitive duties, pending Article 15 review." The words landed heavy. Thornton's face drained color. "Sir." "Dismissed." He stood, salute sharp, then turned and left. The door closed behind him with a hollow thud. The silence that followed was strangely anticlimactic. Pierce exhaled, rubbing a hand across her temple. "He'll appeal. He always does." Bishop nodded. "Let him. Command wants this contained quietly. We'll handle it." He turned to Jenna. "You've shown restraint, Staff Sergeant. That won't go unnoticed." "Thank you, sir." "You'll be reassigned temporarily to the Marksmanship Training Detachment. 2 weeks. After that, we'll discuss your next post." "Yes, sir." Bishop stood and dismissed. She saluted, turned, and walked out. The evening light outside had turned gold, filtering through the base's chain-link fence. Somewhere distant, she heard cadence calls, the rhythm of 100 boots striking pavement. She stopped halfway down the path, watching the sun dip toward the horizon. The sky looked like molten brass. Pierce joined her a minute later, hands in pockets. "You okay?" she asked. Jenna nodded. "I will be." Pierce studied her for a moment, then said, "You know, people will still talk. They'll say he got what he deserved, or that you ruined a man's career." "I didn't ruin it," Jenna said softly. "He did." Pierce smiled faintly. "You sound like someone who's been around too many officers." "Maybe." They stood there in silence for a while, watching the sunlight fade. Pierce finally said, "You did the right thing staying quiet until you could prove it. Most wouldn't have had the patience." "It wasn't patience," Jenna said. "It was survival." Pierce nodded once. "There's a fine line between the two." Jenna turned her eyes toward the fatting range field. Sometimes I think the army teaches you how to fight, but not how to stop fighting. Pierce didn't answer right away. Then, quietly, that's why people like you matter. You remind the rest of us what it looks like when dignity doesn't need to shout. The words lingered long after Pierce walked away. Jenna stood there alone as the last of the light bled out of the sky, rifle sling heavy across her shoulder, the sound of distant drills echoing like ghosts of old battles. And somewhere deep inside her, she understood something she hadn't before. That winning wasn't about the trophy, or the record, or the applause. It was about not letting anyone else define your silence. Why did it feel harder to breathe now that the storm had passed? Fort Bridger's training detachment sat on the far side of base, a quiet stretch of desert scrub and shooting lanes that looked out toward the foothills. It wasn't punishment, not exactly, but reassignment always carried undertones. When they didn't know what to do with you, they sent you to teach. Jenna arrived at the detachment on a Tuesday morning under a sky the color of gunmetal. Her new quarters were small, single bed, one window facing east, the constant hum of generators nearby. The walls smelled faintly of oil and cleaning solvent. The sign outside read, Marksmanship Training Unit 3B. Inside, recruits moved like clockwork, young, nervous, half-drained. Their uniforms still stiff, their eyes still trying to understand what discipline really meant. She stepped into the instructor's bay, and every conversation stopped. A dozen faces turned toward her. At the far end, Gunnery Sergeant Dale Richter looked up from a clipboard. Recognition flickered in his expression. "Staff Sergeant Sullivan," he said. "Didn't think I'd see you back here so soon." "Orders, Gunny." He gestured toward the firing line. "Then let's get you started." The recruits shuffled into place, clumsy, eager. Jenna moved between them like a shadow, calm, precise, quiet. She corrected elbows, adjusted cheek welds, repositioned bipods. Her voice never rose. "Don't fight the rifle," she told them. "Let it breathe with you." They didn't understand it yet. They would. By midday, the desert heat pressed down like armor. Sweat streaked through uniforms, and the smell of powder hung thick in the air. One recruit, barely 20, fired 3 rounds into the dirt. His frustration showed in the way he slammed the bolt forward. "Slow down," Jenna said. "I am slowing down," he snapped. She stepped closer. "You're thinking about missing before you even pull the trigger." He glared at her for a moment, then looked down, embarrassed. "Sorry, Staff Sergeant." "Don't apologize," she said softly. "Adjust." She knelt beside him, guiding his hands into position. "This isn't about force. It's about control. Breath in, half out, hold. Don't pull, press." He tried again. The round hit center mass. The look on his face, that mix of disbelief and pride, reminded her why she'd once loved this job. For the first time in weeks, she smiled. That night she sat outside her quarters under a low desert sky. The stars came early out here, bright enough to sting the eyes. Crickets sang from somewhere near the wire fence. She held a cup of instant coffee, lukewarm now, watching the horizon fade to black. The solitude felt different, not lonely, just quiet. For days she'd told herself she was fine, that what happened with Thornton was over. But endings rarely stayed clean in the military. They lingered in forms, in rumors, in silence. Her comms tablet buzzed against the table. Incoming message encrypted. From Capt. Evelyn Pierce. Subject follow-up. She opened it. Sullivan Division review scheduled for Thursday 900. Thornton has requested legal representation. His statement claims procedural misconduct during investigation. You may be called as witness. Prepare accordingly. EP. Jenna read it twice, then set it aside. Procedural misconduct. The phrase meant one thing. Someone was trying to turn guilt into paperwork. She leaned back against the chair, eyes drifting toward the night sky. She wasn't afraid of a hearing. She just didn't want to go back to that world of polished voices and half-truths. The range made sense. The rest didn't. Footsteps approached through gravel. She didn't turn until the voice came. Still awake. It was Rock Whitman. He carried 2 mugs and that same battered thermos. Figured you'd still be up, he said, handing her one. Guess I am, she replied. He sat down beside her with a quiet groan. Heard about the review. Thornton's not done yet. He's trying to rewrite the story. Of course he is, Rock said. That's what people like him do. They can't live with silence unless they control it. They watched the stars for a moment. You ever wonder, she asked, what it costs to keep fighting? All the time, he said. Question is, can you afford not to? Jenna didn't answer. She sipped the coffee. It was bitter, overcooked. She didn't mind. You'll testify, he asked. If they ask me to. Then tell it clean. No anger, no defense, just truth. Let him drown in his own noise. She smiled faintly. That's poetic for you. He grinned. I read sometimes. They sat there until the generator hum became background to the desert wind. 2 days later, the review board convened in Building 5C. The air inside was cold enough to sting. 3 officers sat behind a narrow table, Colonel Bishop at the center, flanked by Pierce and a legal advisor. Thornton sat at the opposite end, flanked by his attorney, a civilian, gray-suited and practiced. His confidence was brittle, his smile faint. Jenna stood near the side wall, uniform immaculate, hands clasped behind her back. The hearing began quietly. Lieutenant Thornton, Bishop said, you've requested this review under Article 138, claiming improper handling of investigative procedure and reputational damage. State your claim. Thornton's lawyer rose. My client contends that the investigation conducted by Captain Pierce was prejudicial. He was denied access to full evidence, and portions of video data were selectively presented. Furthermore, no chain of custody verification was provided for the alleged footage of the incident. Pierce didn't flinch. Chain of custody was maintained by military intelligence, verified and time-stamped. The lawyer smiled slightly. Yet the footage shows no visible face, merely hands manipulating a rifle. You assume those hands are my client. Pierce replied, badge ID confirms presence. He was alone in that room. The lawyer gestured toward Jenna. Staff Sergeant Sullivan, may I ask, did you see Lieutenant Thornton break your equipment? Jenna looked straight at him. No. The lawyer turned, voice tightening in triumph. Then you have no direct evidence. She didn't blink. I didn't need to see it, I heard it. The room went still. She continued quietly, but every word hit like measured fire. I know what torque failure sounds like. I've been building and breaking mounts for 15 years. That sound wasn't mechanical fatigue. It was deliberate force. The lawyer smirked. So you're basing your accusation on sound? Pierce's voice sliced in. Combined with circumstantial data, yes, and a motive, competition advantage. Bishop raised a hand, silencing the tension. Enough, he turned to Jenna. Staff Sergeant, in your own words, why didn't you report the incident immediately? She hesitated. The truth burned behind her teeth. Because, sir, she said finally, I didn't want to win by complaint. I wanted to win by proof. Silence again. Then Bishop nodded almost imperceptibly. Understood. He conferred briefly with Pierce and the legal advisor. The lawyer shifted uncomfortably, sensing the outcome. When Bishop spoke again, his tone was final. The board finds insufficient basis for procedural misconduct. The original disciplinary action stands. Lieutenant Thornton, you are relieved of duty and subject to administrative reassignment. This hearing is concluded. The gavel's soft strike ended it. Thornton didn't look at her as he stood. His face was pale, his mouth tight, but when he passed her, he stopped. I hope it was worth it, he muttered. She met his eyes, steady, unreadable. It was never about worth, it was about truth. He left without another word. After the hearing, the hallway outside felt warmer, the air thick with quiet relief. Pierce walked beside her, files tucked under one arm. You handled that well. Didn't feel like it. That's how it's supposed to feel. They reached the doorway where sunlight streamed in. Pierce stopped. You'll stay with the training unit for now. Bishop wants you leading advanced marksmanship next cycle. He called it a symbolic assignment. Jenna smiled faintly. That sounds political. It is, but it's also real. Pierce hesitated. You know, not everyone here roots for people like you. Some are just waiting for the next reason to doubt. I know, Jenna said. That's why I don't give them one. Pierce nodded once, the faintest trace of admiration in her eyes. Good answer. They parted ways there, two women in different uniforms, fighting the same quiet war from different angles. Weeks passed. The rhythm of the training detachment became her new heartbeat. Dawn, instruction, cleaning, silence. She learned the recruits' names, their stories. The kid who flinched at every shot because his father had died overseas. The girl who refused to qualify higher than sharpshooter because she didn't want attention. Each of them carried something: fear, pride, doubt. She saw herself in all of them. One evening she stood behind that same recruit from her first week, the one who'd fired into the dirt. He was shooting now at 600 meters, groupings tight, breathing even. Better, she said quietly. He nodded, learned from the best. She almost smiled. You learned from yourself, I just reminded you how. When he packed up, he hesitated. Ma'am, do you ever think it's not worth it, fighting so hard for something that keeps breaking? Her answer came slower than she meant. Every day. But then I remember it's not about the fight, it's about what you become because of it. He nodded, thoughtful. When he walked away, the wind carried a low hum across the desert, the same sound she'd heard before every firefight, every range, every moment she'd had to steady her breath against doubt. That night she wrote a letter. Not to Pierce, not to command. To her father. You once told me the Army doesn't care about fairness. You were right, but it does care about what survives. I'm not sure what I am to it anymore, a soldier, a teacher, or a reminder. But I think I finally understand something you tried to tell me years ago. Dignity doesn't shout, it endures. It keeps showing up even when no one claps. You taught me how to shoot, the Army taught me why. I'm still here. Jenna. She folded the paper, sealed it, and set it beside her lamp. Then she lay down, eyes open to the darkness, listening to the distant echo of gunfire from the night range. It wasn't noise anymore. It was memory. It was peace disguised as war. And for the first time in a long while, she slept without dreaming. Why did peace always feel like a pause instead of an ending? 3 months had passed since the hearing. The range dust still clung to her boots, the desert sun still rose the same way every morning, and Staff Sergeant Jenna Sullivan had almost convinced herself that stillness was safety. Almost. At dawn the air was cool, sharp with the smell of oil and spent brass. She walked the firing line, watching her trainees adjust scopes and whisper last-minute calculations. Their laughter came easy now. They trusted her. She earned that much. But under the hum of generators and the distant pop of gunfire, something inside her stayed alert, an old, restless frequency she couldn't tune out. By mid-morning, a courier jeep rolled in from headquarters. A young private jumped out, handed her a sealed envelope, saluted, and drove off without a word. Orders. The paper inside was thin, official, creased already from the heat. Subject: temporary deployment assignment. Location: Joint Allied Training Initiative, North Africa. Duration: 6 weeks. Role: Senior Marksmanship Advisor/Liaison. Report: Command Briefing 1300 hours, HQ Building 2A. She stared at the letter for a long moment. The edges fluttered in the dry wind. So much for peace. At 12:55, she stood outside Building 2A, uniform pressed, orders folded in her breast pocket. Inside, the air smelled faintly of coffee and polished floor wax. Colonel Bishop looked up from a stack of folders when she entered. "Come in, Sullivan." She saluted, "Sir." He waved it off. "At ease, sit down." She did. Bishop leaned back, fingers steepled. "You've been on range duty 3 months. Your trainees' scores are the highest this detachment's seen in a decade." Command noticed. "Appreciate that, sir." He studied her a moment. "How's the quiet treating you?" She hesitated. "It's quiet." That earned the smallest smile. "I didn't think you'd stay buried out there forever." Allied Command requested an instructor exchange in North Africa. Their long-range division's been losing cohesion, discipline issues, equipment failures, morale slipping. They asked for someone who could teach precision and control. He slid a folder across the table. Inside were satellite photos, names, logistics. "You'll be embedded at Fort Meridian," Bishop said. "It's technically peacetime, but the area borders instability zones. Expect the unexpected." "Understood, sir." He paused, voice softening. "You don't have to prove anything, Sullivan, not anymore." "I know," she said, "but I'd like to remind myself I still can." Bishop nodded. "Fair enough, flight leaves Thursday." She rose, saluted again. "Thank you, sir." As she reached the door, he said quietly, "Sullivan, remember what you wrote on your evaluation form. Precision is patience measured in noise. Don't forget that over there. They'll need it." She smiled faintly. "Yes, sir." 2 days later, she was airborne. The hum of the transport plane vibrated through her bones. Below, the Atlantic stretched endless and cold. Around her, a handful of soldiers dozed in their harness seats. The air smelled of fuel and metal. She kept her journal open on her lap, writing in small, tight script. "New place, new dust, same noise. I tell myself this is temporary, but maybe movement is the only kind of rest people like me get." She closed the notebook, eyes drifting toward the window. Clouds parted, revealing coastline, a vast sweep of desert meeting the sea. Fort Meridian wasn't what she expected. No grand gates, no polished barracks, just concrete huts, rusting hangars, and wind that never stopped. The base sat at the edge of a valley where sand met rock. The horizon shimmered day and night. The air tasted of salt and powder. A tall man greeted her on arrival, Captain Luis Aranda, Spanish liaison officer. His handshake was firm, his accent thick but fluent. "Welcome to Meridian, Sergeant Sullivan," he said. "Hope you like the heat, it doesn't leave." "I've trained in worse," she replied. "I doubt it," he said, smiling. "Come, I'll show you the range." The walk took 10 minutes. Along the way she saw soldiers from 5 different flags, British, French, Moroccan, American, working side by side, but the rhythm was wrong. Orders overlapped, equipment scattered. Discipline, yes, but cohesion, none. At the range, half the shooters were arguing over zero adjustments, the other half staring at empty water bottles. Aranda sighed. "Now you see why they sent for you." She nodded slowly. "Where's your range book?" He handed it to her. She flipped through pages filled with messy handwriting, incomplete data, inconsistent wind calls. "All right," she said, "we start over." That afternoon, under sun that burned through her uniform, she rebuilt their training from scratch. She lined them shoulder to shoulder, stripped jargon, drilled fundamentals. Breath, trigger, follow through. None of it matters if your head's not steady. When one of them scoffed, she handed him her rifle. "Show me steady." He missed twice. She took the rifle back, exhaled once, and hit a 6-inch plate at 700 meters. No more laughter after that. By week's end, they listened. By week 2, they respected. And somewhere between the dust storms and long debriefs, Jenna began to feel something she hadn't in months: purpose without politics. But peace never lasted long near fault lines. The incident came on the 12th day. They were running a joint exercise in the lower valley. Range lanes stretched between outcrops, teams rotating through timed drills. Jenna was supervising spotting calls when the first explosion rolled through the air, distant but close enough to feel in her ribs. Everyone froze. "Training detonation?" Aranda asked. She shook her head. "Too deep, that's ordnance." Seconds later, the radio crackled. A panicked voice in accented English. "Checkpoint Delta under fire, unknown hostiles, 3 clicks north." Aranda barked orders. "Alpha Team, defensive posture, medical to vehicle Bay 1. Jenna's pulse steadied instantly. The noise, the chaos, it was familiar. Her mind shifted gears like an old machine that still knew how to run. "Captain," she said, "I've got eyes on the ridge. I can cover your convoy." "You're not here for combat," he said. "I'm here to keep people alive." He hesitated, then nodded once. "Take position." She grabbed her rifle, Thornton's old one, the same weapon she'd refused to replace, and sprinted toward the overwatch point. The climb was brutal. Heat shimmered off the rocks, sweat stung her eyes. But when she reached the top, the world narrowed again, scope, breath, heartbeat. Through the optic, she saw smoke rising near the checkpoint, 2 vehicles burning, small arms fire crackling. Meridian actual, this is Sullivan. Visual on contacts, 5 to 6 hostiles moving west of checkpoint. Copy Sullivan, hold fire unless engaged. She steadied her scope. One figure moved into view, rifle raised, aiming toward the pinned Allied troops. She didn't hesitate. Trigger press. The rifle kicked, echo rolling down the valley. The target dropped. Another stepped out, dragging the first away. Second shot hit. She exhaled, repositioned, scanned for more. Voices over comms rose. Contact neutralized. Move up. Within minutes, Allied forces regained control. Smoke thinned, replaced by the dull hum of radios and the distant wail of medics. When it was over, she lowered the rifle and just sat there breathing. Her hands were steady, too steady. That scared her more than the gunfire. Hours later in the operations tent, Aranda approached her. His expression was grim but grateful. "You saved lives today," he said, "but command will ask questions." "Let them. They'll say you broke protocol." "Protocol doesn't bleed." He studied her face a long moment, then nodded. "You remind me of people I served with years ago. They never lasted long in peace, either." She didn't answer. She just sat on a crate, cleaning the rifle under lantern light. Somewhere inside, she felt that old, dangerous calm, the one that came when control met chaos. She wasn't proud of it, but she knew it. That night she wrote again. "The desert sounds like the range, wind, sand, silence, same rhythm. Today, I pulled the trigger again. It felt like remembering something I'd tried to forget. Maybe peace isn't the absence of war. Maybe it's just the space between decisions." She closed the notebook and stared at the tent canvas rippling in the wind. Days passed. Command debriefed her twice, each time circling the same question. "Why did you engage without direct order?" Each time she gave the same answer, because it was the only option left. They couldn't argue with the results. When the last report was filed, Captain Aranda handed her a single piece of paper, commendation request, unsigned. "For bravery under fire," he said. "It'll get buried under red tape, but it's there." "Keep it," she said. "I didn't come for medals." He smiled sadly. "Then what did you come for?" She thought about it, searching for the words. "To remember who I was before they told me who to be." He nodded slowly. "Then I think you found it." Her last night at Fort Meridian was quiet. The trainees gathered around a small fire near the hangar, trading stories in broken English and laughter. Someone handed her a cup of tea, strong, bitter, sweetened with dust. One of the younger soldiers asked, "Staff Sergeant, what do you tell yourself before you shoot?" She looked into the flames, thinking. "That I'm not aiming to destroy," she said finally. "I'm aiming to end what shouldn't have started." They fell silent, the fire crackling between them. Above them, the stars over the desert burned bright, untouched, indifferent. And somewhere deep inside her chest, something loosened. Not joy, not peace, just release. 2 days later, back at Fort Bridger, the air felt different, softer. Bishop met her on the tarmac. "Heard you had an eventful deployment." "Routine, sir." He raised an eyebrow. "That's one word for it." They walked toward the admin building in companionable silence. At the doorway he said quietly, "You've got people here who'd follow your lead. Training Command wants a new instructor for the division's precision school. You interested?" She looked past him toward the range fields glowing in late afternoon light. "Yes, sir," she said. "I think I am." He nodded. "Good, you've earned it." As he walked away, she stayed there a moment longer, watching recruits on the far line fire their first rounds. The sound drifted across the field, sharp, rhythmic, alive. And for the first time, it didn't remind her of war. It reminded her of purpose. She smiled faintly, whispering into the fatting wind. Sometimes survival isn't about staying alive. It's about staying true. The echo carried across the range like a heartbeat. And somewhere beyond that horizon, the desert wind answered. Why did quiet victories always feel heavier than loud ones? Fort Bridger looked different now, not because it had changed, but because she had. The same wind still carried dust across the concrete, the same flag still snapped under the same endless sky. But when Staff Sergeant Jenna Sullivan returned, it was as if the base itself watched her with new eyes. People nodded when she passed, not out of duty, out of respect. That was new. Her new assignment began at dawn on a Monday. Division Precision School. The sign over the entrance was faded from years of sun, but the range beyond was immaculate, white steel targets gleaming against the far hills, distance markers etched in the earth like old scars. She stood at the edge of the field, a clipboard tucked under her arm, watching the trainees line up for orientation. 10 of them hand-picked, the best shooters in their units. Most were young, too young, she thought, faces still unwrinkled by failure. They shifted uneasily as she approached, whispering between themselves. "Staff Sergeant Sullivan," she introduced herself. "You've all heard stories. Most of them aren't true, the rest don't matter." Her tone was calm, clipped, but the silence that followed carried weight. "This course isn't about shooting. It's about control. You'll learn that accuracy isn't a skill, it's a language. Every miss tells you what you refuse to hear." A few exchanged glances, confused. She smiled faintly. "You'll understand." Behind her, Gunnery Sergeant Dale Richter, still grizzled, still unamused, folded his arms. "You heard her. Line up. Zero your weapons. You've got 4 minutes." The clatter of gear replaced uncertainty. And just like that, the new chapter began. Weeks passed in the rhythm of repetition. The early mornings, the drills, the silent corrections, the smell of gunpowder and sunscreen. Jenna's teaching style was unlike any of the instructors before her. She didn't shout. She didn't berate. She simply observed, and when she spoke, it was quiet enough that they had to listen. "Your breath is telling on you," she said once to a trainee. "You're angry. The bullet always knows." Another day, "Don't fight the recoil. It's just gravity reminding you you're alive." They didn't always understand her metaphors, but they remembered them. She wasn't just teaching shooting, she was teaching composure. And yet sometimes, when the wind shifted across the range, she'd catch the echo of the past, that sound of her scope cracking, that smell of betrayal in the air. But it didn't sting anymore. It reminded her she'd survived it. On the 3rd week, a new trainee arrived late, an emergency transfer from another unit. Her name was Private First Class Nora Briggs. Barely 22, small frame, nervous eyes. Her file said she'd scored high on entry-level marksmanship but consistently failed on endurance ranges. When she reported in, Jenna studied her quietly. "You've missed the first 2 weeks of instruction," she said. "Yes, Staff Sergeant," Nora replied quickly. "You'll catch up or you won't. Either way, you'll learn something." "Yes, Staff Sergeant." Jenna gestured to the line, "Set up." That first afternoon, Nora struggled. Her grip was fine, her stance serviceable, but her breathing ragged. Her eyes flicked between targets like someone waiting to be told what to do. After 3 missed shots in a row, Jenna crouched beside her. "Stop." Nora froze. "Close your eyes," Jenna said softly. "Tell me what you hear." "Wind," Nora whispered. "Voices, my heart." "Too loud," Jenna said. "Now slow it down, match the wind, make it one sound." The girl hesitated, then exhaled. Her next shot rang true, center mass. She turned, startled. "How did?" "You listened," Jenna said simply. "That's all shooting is." Something flickered in Nora's face, awe, maybe gratitude. But beneath it, Jenna saw something else. Fear. Not of failure, of expectation. And she recognized it instantly, because it looked like her younger self. The days grew shorter, the light sharper. Training intensified, field drills, live scenarios, crosswind shooting. Jenna rarely smiled, but her pride showed in small ways, a nod here, a quiet word there. The class was good, very good. But Nora, she was different. When she hit perfect. When she missed, she unraveled. One evening after the range cleared, Jenna found her alone, sitting cross-legged near the 400-meter mark, rifle across her lap, eyes red. "Everyone else hits clean," Nora muttered. "I get one gust and I choke." Jenna sat beside her without speaking. The air smelled of dust and oil. After a while, Nora said, "You think I'm not built for this, don't you?" "I think you're trying too hard to prove you are," Jenna replied. Nora's jaw tightened. "You ever feel like no one believes you belong here?" Jenna looked out across the field, remembering the faces that once watched her fail before she'd even begun. "Every day," she said quietly. "The trick isn't proving them wrong, it's proving yourself right." Nora turned to her. "And if you can't?" "Then you try again," Jenna said. "And again, until you stop caring who's watching." They sat in silence as the last light faded from the sky. When Nora finally spoke again, her voice was soft. "They said you broke a record no one thought could be broken. That true?" Jenna smiled faintly. "Records don't matter, what you do next does." The girl nodded slowly, wiping her eyes. That night, for the first time, Nora didn't stay behind after hours. And the next morning, her first 5 rounds cut one clean hole through the 300-meter target. Weeks turned into months. Word spread about the precision school's scores, the division's best in years. Command sent photographers, writers, even a film team. They wanted footage for recruitment media. Jenna hated it. Cameras had nothing to do with discipline. They broke rhythm, pulled the focus out of what mattered. But she let them film, if only to give her students the credit they'd earned. When the segment aired weeks later, something unexpected happened. The public loved it. Headlines called her the quiet legend. Videos went viral. Recruitment spikes followed. For the first time, people outside Fort Bridger said her name with admiration instead of curiosity. But fame came with shadows. Reporters started sending interview requests. Documentarians called. Even veterans from old units wrote to her, some kind, some jealous. Through it all, Jenna kept her distance. She hadn't done any of this for attention. Still, one morning she found a letter on her desk. No return address, typed neatly. "You think you've rebuilt yourself, but all it takes is one mistake to remind them what they thought you were." No signature. "Just wait." She read it twice. then folded it neatly and locked it in her drawer. She didn't tell anyone, not even Pierce. That evening during night drills, Nora noticed something was off. "Staff Sergeant," she said quietly, "you all right?" Jenna looked up from her scope, the faintest crack in her composure. "I'm fine." But her shots that night were off. Not by much, but enough that she noticed, and so did Nora. After the drill, the girl approached her again. "You told me once not to fight the wind, that sometimes it pushes for a reason. Maybe you need to listen to your own advice." It wasn't defiance, it was concern, genuine. Jenna almost smiled. "You've been paying attention." Nora shrugged. "Guess I had a good teacher." They packed up in silence, the desert cooling fast around them. 2 days later, Colonel Bishop summoned her to headquarters. When she entered, he looked serious. "You've got another assignment request." "Another?" she asked. "This one's internal. Joint Marksmanship Competition, DC Invitational. They want you as lead trainer for the Army team." She frowned. "That's not really my thing anymore." "I know," Bishop said, "but it's politics, optics. You'd be doing more good than you think." She sighed. "Let me guess, refusal goes on record." He smiled faintly, "Something like that." She nodded. "All right, I'll go." "Good," he said. "And Sullivan, one more thing. Command knows about the letter." Her head lifted. "What letter?" "Anonymous note, threat technically. Security flagged it." "I didn't report it." "Doesn't matter, someone did." Her pulse steadied. "Who?" Bishop's expression softened. "Private Briggs. She found the envelope when she was helping sort your mail." Jenna exhaled, part frustration, part gratitude. "I'll handle it." "I know you will," Bishop said. "Just remember, silence protects you until it doesn't." That night she found Nora waiting outside the barracks. "You reported it," Jenna said simply. "Yes, Staff Sergeant." "Why?" "Because I've seen what happens when people try to handle things alone." Jenna studied her. The same fire she'd once seen in her own reflection burned behind the girl's tired eyes. "You're a better soldier than you think," Jenna said finally. "Learn from the best," Nora said again, half smiling. For a long time they stood there in silence, the night air sharp, filled with the distant echo of rifle fire from another training unit. When Jenna finally spoke, her voice was soft but certain. "Don't ever let this place teach you that silence is strength. Sometimes it's just fear wearing a uniform." Nora nodded slowly. "I won't." And in that moment, Jenna realized the strangest truth of all. That teaching someone else how to survive might finally be her own way of healing. Weeks later, as winter set in, the range fell quiet again. Training slowed. Paper targets replaced steel. Jenna walked the line alone one morning, frost glinting off the dirt. She stopped at the farthest target, fingers brushing the cold metal. In the stillness, her reflection stared back at her, small, warped by distance, framed by empty sky. She whispered, not to the wind, not to anyone, just to the silence itself. "Maybe this is what peace really is. Not the absence of noise, but the choice not to answer every echo." Behind her, the sun rose slow and gold. And for once, she didn't brace for impact. She just stood there, breathing. Alive. Why did endings never sound like they were supposed to? The flight to DC cut through clouds the color of steel. Jenna sat by the window, uniform pressed, metal ribbons muted against olive green. Outside, the sky stretched endless, detached. Below, the continent moved like memory, slow, heavy, inevitable. She hadn't wanted to come. Public competitions had never meant much to her. But orders were orders, and part of her wanted to see if the quiet she'd built could survive noise again. When the plane landed at Andrews, cameras waited. Not many, just enough to remind her that anonymity was gone. She stepped off the ramp into the cold wind, shoulders squared, expression neutral. The flashbulbs popped once, twice, and then faded behind tinted car windows. The National Marksmanship Invitational was held on the outskirts of the city, at a range framed by autumn trees and manicured lawns, a far cry from the dust and noise of Bridger. Flags lined the spectator stands. Sponsors, logos gleamed on banners. Jenna stood at the firing line scanning the field. Teams from every branch and even allied nations adjusted scopes and joked among themselves. The air hummed with confidence. Captain Evelyn Pierce found her before the first briefing. "You made it." Jenna smiled faintly. "Thought you escaped me." "Not a chance," Pierce said. "I'm supervising range safety. Somebody has to make sure you don't rewrite the record books again." Jenna chuckled softly. "No promises." Pierce's voice lowered. "You doing okay after everything?" Jenna hesitated. "Better than I thought I would be." Pierce nodded. "Good. Just remember, people came to see a legend today. Don't let that weigh more than your shot." She walked away, leaving the faint scent of gun oil and cold air behind. The first day moved in rhythm, zeroing, calibration, drills. Cameras rolled quietly at the edges. Interviewers hovered, waiting for quotes she never gave. She wasn't there to speak, she was there to shoot. Each round felt cleaner than the last. Her body remembered everything. Her breath fell into that old cadence: inhale, half exhale, press, recoil, reset. By afternoon, the scoreboard told the story. SULLIVAN 3940, lead position. Applause rose from the crowd, polite but warm. She didn't smile, not yet. Because out of the corner of her eye, she'd noticed a familiar silhouette among the observers. Dark uniform, cap low, face she hadn't seen since the hearing. Thornton. He wasn't in competition gear, just standing beyond the barrier, arms crossed, watching. She froze for half a heartbeat. Pierce followed her gaze. "Ignore him," she murmured. "I thought he was reassigned," Jenna said quietly. "He was," Pierce replied. "He's here on civilian contract, consulting, nothing official." The words tasted wrong. Jenna refocused, but her rhythm faltered. Her next shot drifted low, first miss all day. She exhaled hard, reset. "Copy," her spotter said, tone even. The next bullet hit dead center, then another, then another. By sunset, she'd reclaimed the top slot. But the image of Thornton in the crowd stayed, burned into the corner of her vision like an afterimage that refused to fade. That night, back in her assigned quarters, she sat by the window overlooking the training grounds. The city lights pulsed faintly beyond the trees. Her phone buzzed once. Unknown number, a text. "Nice shooting today. Some of us taught you well." No signature. She stared at it for a long moment, thumb hovering. Then she deleted it, no reply. Instead, she opened her small notebook, the same one she'd carried since Meridian. The pages smelled faintly of dust and sand. The ghosts always find new uniforms. Maybe that's fine. Maybe they remind us who we promised to be. She closed the book, exhaled, and let the silence stretch. Day 2, finals. The air was colder, the crowd larger. Reporters lined the barriers. The national anthem played, echoing off the steel plates downrange. Jenna checked her rifle, her own rifle this time. The old Nightforce scope gleamed in the morning light, restored, balanced, perfectly zeroed. Pierce gave her a thumbs up from the tower. "Final event," the announcer said. "Mixed distance challenge, 40 rounds, time limit 10 minutes. Jenna lay prone, body aligning with the earth. Her heartbeat slowed. Then, "Commence fire." The world disappeared. 100 meters, impact. 300, impact. 500, slight holdover, impact. Wind picked up, she adjusted. Her spotter called numbers, left cross 5 knots, but she barely heard him. It was all instinct now. By the halfway mark, she hadn't missed once. Then movement, far left behind the barrier. Thornton again, talking to an event official. hand gestures sharp. She blocked it out. 800 meters, the longest target. She adjusted elevation, exhaled. Crack impact. The crowd murmured approval. Pierce watched from the tower, eyes narrowing as she followed Thornton's path through the spectators. Something about his stance, defensive, agitated, put her on edge. Down on the line, Jenna reloaded. The last magazine slid home with a click that felt final. Last 10. She fired one after another, clean, steady, perfect. And then, click. The rifle jammed. Gasps rippled through the stands. Her hand moved automatically, bolt back, eject, clear, reset, but the mechanism stuck, a hairline of resistance she'd never felt before. Pierce swore under her breath, grabbed a binocular, focused on the malfunction. The bolt cam looked tampered. Jenna stayed calm. Years of repetition kicked in. She forced the action open, caught the bent casing with her fingers, flung it aside, chambered a new round. One deep breath. Fire. Hit. Applause erupted, scattered, rising like a wave. She fired again. And again. Each round a heartbeat. When the whistle finally blew, the field fell silent. The scoreboard flickered once, then froze. SULLIVAN 40-40, new national record. The noise that followed was thunder. She stayed prone for a moment longer, breathing, the rifle still warm against her cheek. Then she rose. Pierce met her halfway, eyes fierce. You okay? Fine. That wasn't random, Pierce said quietly. Bolt casing doesn't bend like that on its own. Jenna glanced toward the crowd. Thornton was gone. Let it go, she said softly. Pierce exhaled. You sure? Jenna nodded. He already lost once, that's enough. Pierce looked at her for a long moment, then nodded. You really don't need words, do you? Jenna smiled faintly. Never did. The medal ceremony was simple. No podium speeches, no pomp. Just the sound of boots on gravel, applause, and cold wind cutting through the flags. When Bishop pinned the ribbon on her uniform, he said, You've come a long way from that maintenance bay, Sullivan. She almost laughed. Feels like another lifetime. It was, he said. You made it one. The cameras flashed. Somewhere beyond them, she thought she saw a shadow linger by the exit gate, watching, then turning away. She didn't follow. Some ghosts didn't need confrontation, only distance. Later, she found herself walking the empty range alone. The grass was damp with dew, the city hummed faint in the distance. She stopped at the far lane, the steel target still scarred from her last round. Moonlight caught the metal, turning it pale and cold. She set her rifle down and just breathed. The stillness was perfect, no sound but wind through trees, no judgment, no eyes watching. She thought of all the noise that had brought her here, the orders, the hearings, the whispers, the shots that saved and the ones that broke. And she realized something she hadn't been able to before. Winning hadn't fixed her. Losing wouldn't have destroyed her. What mattered was that, through it all, she'd never stopped showing up. That was the quiet truth no one filmed, no one celebrated. She smiled at the thought, small and unguarded. Footsteps approached behind her. Couldn't sleep either. It was Pierce, coat collar turned up, coffee in hand. Old habits, Jenna said. Pierce joined her at the line. They stood side by side in the pale light. Do you ever miss it? Jenna asked softly. The noise, Pierce said. Sometimes, but I miss the people more, the ones who kept standing when it stopped. Jenna nodded. The silence feels different when you've earned it. Pierce looked at her. You know they'll want you to speak tomorrow. Press, recruitment, maybe a book deal. Jenna smiled. They'll get their quotes, just not the ones they expect. Pierce laughed quietly. Can't wait to hear that. They stood there until the first hint of sunrise colored the horizon. When Pierce finally left, Jenna stayed behind. She reached into her pocket, pulled out a folded scrap of paper, the last line of her old notebook, written that morning before the final round. She unfolded it slowly, whispering the words as the light grew. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts. She tucked it into the buttstock of her rifle, a secret reminder hidden in plain sight. Then she raised the weapon one last time, aimed at the horizon and fired. The single shot echoed across the empty field, clean, sharp, final. No target. No applause. Just truth. She lowered the rifle, exhaled, and let the silence close gently around her. For the first time in years, it didn't sound empty. It sounded like peace.